We begin in the United States, where the Supreme Court has issued a ruling that will limit the ability of federal judges around the country to block presidential orders. Now, the decision is seen as a significant win for President Donald Trump, whose policies have sometimes been blocked by federal courts. The case originates from Trump's efforts to limit birthright citizenship, in which babies born on American soil are automatically citizens of the United States. And President Trump called the decision a monumental victory and vowed to push forward with his policy agenda.
So thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with these numerous policies and those that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis, including birthright citizenship, ending sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping federal taxpayers from paying for transgender surgeries, and numerous other priorities of the American people.
Let's cross over to our correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon in Washington, D.C. So we just heard Trump there laying out some of his agenda that he thinks will benefit from this ruling. Perhaps you could just start by explaining a little more exactly what the Supreme Court has decided here and how it affects Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship.
So just to refresh our viewers' memories on what this executive order actually is. So this is an executive order by Trump that says that the children born to undocumented migrants or foreigners holding temporary visas can no longer be considered U.S. citizens automatically. Now, as you pointed out, this, of course, is enshrined in the Constitution. If you are born in the U.S., you are a U.S. citizen, unless, of course, you're the child of diplomats. Now, this was an executive order that was challenged in court by individual plaintiffs as well as organizations representing immigrant families. And as a result of these challenges, 3 district courts issued nationwide injunctions blocking the enforcement of the ban. So that brings us to today's ruling. What the Supreme Court has now ruled is that they want to limit these injunctions. They can no longer apply on a nationwide basis. These injunctions will now only stop enforcement of this executive order for the plaintiffs that have brought about the cases. So what this is not is a ruling on the merits and legality of canceling birthright citizenship. So we can expect this to be a question that comes up again for the Supreme Court at some point when they are back in session later in the year. However, this ruling also does not mean that the executive order will be implemented immediately. They said that they are giving it 30 days from today, from this ruling, to allow time for legal challenges, and we can expect reasonably that these legal challenges will come.
And Donald Trump is calling this a monumental victory. Is he right?
Well, he certainly seems to think so. He called it a major win. He was speaking to reporters. He said that he railed against sort of leftist activist judges, radical left judges, who were preventing him from delivering on policies that the American people voted for. He personally thanked the conservative justices who put forward this ruling, noting, of course, that this ruling was made along ideological lines, 6-3, with the conservative justices voting in favor. But you can really see, even though this ruling only applies in particular to this executive order on birthright citizenship, you can see how the legal thinking behind it allows the administration to revive policies that had been languishing under nationwide injunctions. Now, he mentioned some of them in that quote from him that you just played, policies on suspending refugee resettlement or funding for transgender surgeries. But the fact is, this list is very long. It also includes, for example, the firing of federal workers or defunding foreign aid or even DACA. So this really is a key victory for Donald Trump. Not only would it allow him to have an easier time of governing via executive order, it's also going to make it easier for him to do this faster, no matter how bold or sweeping these executive orders are. Just because all the other remedies that are sort of left on the table now that nationwide injunctions have been limited, things like class action suits, they're a lot more onerous and would then take longer as a challenge to Donald Trump and his policies in the courts.
I mean, this seems fairly consequential for American democracy. How exactly is this going to affect checks and balances when it comes to presidential powers?
You know, this is a very good question. At the very least, we saw the Supreme Court vote today to limit the power of the courts to act as a check on the executive. And this is especially significant at this time where, if you look to Congress, you know, the Republican majority has made them less inclined to really act as a check on the executive here. That has been left mostly to the courts, as we have seen, and now they will be less able to do so. And this really does represent, in a way, a huge expansion of presidential power. And this is going to be something that has implications, of course, not just for this administration, but for succeeding administrations to come.
Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. It's our correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon in Washington, D.C.
Well,
And I'm happy to welcome back to DW Ethan Bearman of the Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. He's also an attorney and political commentator. Thanks for your time. Donald Trump's obviously very happy. How much of a victory is this for him?
Well, this is relatively significant. The Supreme Court today really showed their hand for determining in essentially President Trump's favor. What I want to caution that by saying some of what happened today that we're going to get to will also affect Republican judges who try to stop Democratic presidents that we saw during President Joe Biden's term just the other year. But overall, this clears the path for President Trump to accomplish much more of what he wanted to accomplish through executive action as opposed to legislative action.
Okay, interesting. And how does this affect, if we look at birthright citizenship, this executive order on that? How does it impact this?
Well, it doesn't directly get to it yet. However, in the interim, anybody who is born in the United States not to U.S. citizen parents, I think that there's a legitimate question whether or not those children are U.S. citizens while these cases are ongoing. This was an interesting ruling because it didn't actually address the question yet. It addressed whether or not individual federal judges have the ability to effectuate a nationwide injunction as opposed to just in their district. And this Supreme Court today ruled only people who have filed suit essentially in that district are able to have an injunction placed by that court. Only those people are protected, not everybody.
Okay, understand. Now, I want to read you something from the New York Times opinion page. They've said, what can individual federal courts immediately do when the president issues a blatantly unconstitutional order? The Supreme Court gave its answer on Friday morning, not much. Eric Bearman, what does this mean for checks and balances when it comes to presidential powers?
Well, this is a significant weakening of the judiciary. It's a significant strengthening of the executive branch. This is the culmination of this recent phenomenon in U.S. history called originalism, which is that they are narrowly reading the Constitution only as it would have been read in 1789, not through centuries now of jurisprudence that precedes the current Supreme Court. In essence, today, the Supreme Court has thrown out the majority of the pieces of 20th century jurisprudence and 21st century, essentially, that discuss how injunctions work, how the judiciary can check the power of the executive branch. And this is a big step toward the unitary executive theory that the right wing and conservatives have been pushing for a couple of decades now.
And dissenting Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she said the ruling was a threat and essentially accused Trump of gaming the courts to break the law. She said it was shameful that the court was playing along. Do you think she has a point?
I definitely think she has a point, because what this is it literally throws out 125 years plus of precedent. And really, think about this issue in particular, birthright citizenship. 1857 was the Dred Scott decision. It was terrible. And it said black people have no rights to be protected because they were brought here as slaves. The 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, which was passed to get rid of this idea that black people were not equal in the United States. And in I believe it was 98, is the Wong Kim decision, Wong Kim Ark decision that said Chinese people that were their babies that were born in the United States were automatically citizens. So this is 127 years now that the courts have upheld this idea of birthright citizenship. The decision today says we don't care about that. So if the president does something, only the people who have the ability to sue the federal government are able to do so and be protected by an unconstitutional act by the executive. This is a groundbreaking decision today by the United States Supreme Court that is going to have wide-ranging ramifications in the United States.
We've been speaking to attorney and political commentator Bearman in Los Angeles. Ethan, thank you so much for your analysis today.